Hello everybody, Future Ian of Animation here, and let me be clear, I like Honkai Starrail. I wish the best for the game and genuinely enjoy the story and characters, which is why what I'm going to say next comes from a place of love and wanting the game to improve, and not from the eyes of a hater. But here's the truth. Honkai Starrail is a bad game. Now I could end the video here, but indulge me for a second and let me explain myself. Bit of background for you. I am currently studying games design at university in my second year, so I have some qualifications to discuss this from a more pragmatic perspective. Honkai Starrail is incredibly simple. Now, this can be good for games, especially games that are aimed at a wider audience, as it makes getting into the game smooth and easy for just about anybody. Most games similar to Honkai Starrail have more than just one decision you can make at any given time. A game like Pokemon, for example, lets you decide between 4 moves, maybe switching out a Pokemon or using an item. And other games, such as Persona, allow for similar choices on each character's turn. Honkai Starrail forgoes all of this in favor of a much simpler system, and this is not necessarily a bad thing. The next step, once you've got your basic gameplay loop, is deciding on the constants for your game, the rules that govern every combat encounter. For Pokemon, this is your typings. In Honkai Starrail, there are 2 fundamental systems established from the very first fight in the game. These are skill points that are required to use most skills in the game, and enemy weaknesses that need you to bring a character of the corresponding type in order to deal with. Now from here, any other game would elaborate on these mechanics, make them trickier to navigate or add depth, and there have been times when Honkai Starrail has done exactly this. Generally, the words of our trailblazer, rules are made to be broken, shouldn't be applied to games design, but in certain circumstances it can be fine. For example, some characters can break the rules directly as a part of their quirk or appealing factor. Examples of this that are fine in Honkai Starrail are Arlen, Chingcha, Silverwolf, Sparkle, and Acheron. And for the first year or so, Starrail did a pretty good job of elaborating on their rules without ignoring or breaking them too much. A good example of this is Sam's boss fight. In this fight, Sam has a phase in which he makes it so that when you use a skill point, your active character will take damage. This is great. It adds an extra layer to this fight that makes it interesting and means you have to think a little harder about whether you can actually get away with using your skill points, or if you have to hold off until this effect is gone or you've managed to get a heal or shield in place. This extra complexity makes the sometimes boring base gameplay of Honkai Starrail much more interesting and adds a variety to the game that makes it compelling to interact with. I mentioned that some characters can break the rules of the game, and that's okay. The examples I mentioned all had specific ways in which they break the rules. Arlen, for example, consumes his own HP instead of skill points. Silverwolf can give enemies a weakness they don't normally have. Chingcha and Imbiber to Lune can consume more than 1 skill point on their turn. Sparkle increases your skill point cap and has ways of returning more than 1 skill point at a time. And Acheron has a unique way of gaining access to her ultimate that is not reliant on energy. I think that these are successful because they have limitations. Arlen consumes his own HP and makes himself weaker and more vulnerable to enemy attacks in order to do damage instead of using skill points. This doesn't regain skill points, so he ends up being neutral, which is fine and enables some interesting teams for him. Silverwolf can only implant a random weakness corresponding to an ally's element to 1 enemy at a time, meaning that if there are 2 or 3 tanky enemies on the field, it's going to take her multiple turns to get those weaknesses implanted. This does break a rule of the game, but in a way that is interesting and requires thought to be properly utilized. Imbiber to Lune and Chingcha can both burn skill points to do increased damage, but whether or not it's a good idea to burn those skill points in any given situation is something that requires thought. This can be a detriment to your team rather than a benefit. Sparkle lets you regain skill points with her ult, and increases the cap of skill points. However, you can still go skill point negative in Sparkle teams, and so again, it requires some thought, and despite Acheron's different ways of accessing her ultimate, it doesn't mean she can just spam it over and over again with no real downtime. It is possible to break the rules of your game in certain scenarios if doing so adds extra dimensions or complexity and is not dumbing down and further simplifying the game. Here's where we start to see Honkai Starrail's problems. These started with Acheron, funnily enough, because as much as I just praised her for reimagining a core rule of the game, Acheron has her own problems. And one of those is that she ignores enemy weakness in her ult and just reduces their toughness anyways. This is dumbing the game down. You now don't need to pay as much attention to what element you bring to the fight, nor do you have to try and weave Silverwolf into your team if you want to force Acheron against the boss that she doesn't have a weakness she wants. Acheron can just ignore that. And this design philosophy continues into further characters from this point onwards, with Boothill having a weakness implant on his ult, Firefly having multiple ways of breaking toughness in her kit, and Facial's ult being a copy-paste of Acheron's but for single target. We then also have the problems posed by characters like Sunday, and ostensibly the Harter. They are both skill point negative characters who want to use their skill every single turn. However, if you get their light cones, this is no longer an issue really and puts them into the skill point neutral territory. Sunday is a much worse offender of this, as he has it in his kit that if he uses his skill on someone that he's used his ult on, he just regains a skill point, meaning that using his skill doesn't do anything. There's no negative, there's no drawback. You just get a free buff and a free action advance, which is not something that should exist in a game like this. This means the whole point of skill points, making it so that you have to strategically use your character's abilities at the correct time in order to make it through any given combat scenario, is simplified and dumbed down. The oh so gracious development team has made it easier for your simple little mind, and now you can just use your skill every turn with no worries. Oh, aren't they generous? But in doing this, they are making the game actively worse and more boring. The skill point problem has continued for most of Amphorius, with both Maide and Castris being unable to consume skill points at all, even if they wanted to, with no real downside to using their skill at all. This is not simply a problem of numbers getting bigger and thus order units becoming worse by proxy, but it's a problem in which every new character just ignores more and more systems that the game has in place until eventually it will culminate in a character who ignores skill points, ignores enemy weakness, and has unlimited ultimate usage. By simplifying and removing the core parts of your already very simple game, it doesn't add anything or create interesting kit design. It just makes the game more boring and less engaging, whilst making every new character look more powerful than the last and much easier to play. I haven't even touched on the issue of power creep really, or the issue of every new character kit being overloaded. I've only mentioned how the Honkai Starrail devs are currently breaking the golden rule of making a game like this, and are ignoring all their own systems that they set in place and making their boring, simple game more boring and more simple. Honkai Starrail has such potential to be fun and interesting, and we've seen it before with characters like QQ and with boss fights like Sam, but the current development team seemingly has no interest in doing any of this, and that truly is saddening. If these issues are not fixed, or at the very least don't seem to be getting any better by the time the Amphorius saga is over, then I think that might be it for me. Where I once saw a simple but relatively entertaining game with potential to be so much more in the future, I now see a husk of what once was, with all of its core systems ripped out and lying in a mess on the ground. That's sad. I do not think this is unfixable. As much as some of these characters that ignore base systems are a problem, especially those whose ignorance of said systems is locked behind eidolons or light cones, that doesn't mean this is the end for Starrail. They have not yet added too many of these types of characters to go back, and whilst someone like Anaxa or Sunday can feel like a big step in the wrong direction, sometimes they aren't as bad as they seem. Ultimately, if Starrail stops ignoring and trying to break open its rules and starts making characters who perform well within those rules, then the game has a chance of retaining its identity. A character like Hyoscine is an example of this, because whilst her power creep is undeniable in terms of the raw damage and sustain that she outputs for the team, she doesn't just ignore skill points or weaknesses or ultimate limitations. You still have to think about what you're going to do whilst using her. More characters like Cypher, Hyoscine, Aglaya, and even Tribby would be great for keeping the game within its rules, if maybe with a little less power creep in terms of raw stats. And whilst I can't talk about the 3.4 characters as of writing this, they seem pretty good, with those who muck about with the base rules of the game adding some form of complexity or choice that doesn't make them a turn your brain off and just press E over and over again type of character. Also, for someone like Castris, you could increase the HP drain on her skill, or make it add defense shred to allied targets in order to make it feel like there's more risk to using it at the cost of it not using skill points, but Hoyo doesn't directly nerf units, so we probably won't ever see that. Thank you for watching this short analysis of Honkai Starrail's systems and reasoning as to why it's really feeling less fun and more like punching a sack of flour in every fight. I hope this has helped some of you piece together some dots or reflects the thoughts that you already had. I want to reiterate that I really do love this game, and this video is made out of a hope for the game to be better and not out of malice. Regardless, I can't say for sure what will happen in the future, so for now, we'll just have to see where this train goes next.